I'm going to be showing you an animation technique now, and it is a very specific animation technique, but of course you can always build on it and sort of do your own things with it. But I'm going to show you how to sort of animate a ball kind of rolling down through sort of a cone, kind of like those things you'll see at the store where you stick your penny in and you watch it roll down into the center. So it's kind of that principle, which can be easily animated if you know what you're doing. So I'm going to load in our cone and rotate that around, holding down Shift, just to make sure that we're sticking with the proper proportions. Rotate it at negative 180 degrees, and I'm going to drop that object. Now what I also want to do is squash that out, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And then raise it up and drop it back down. Now, since this is just a solid cone, we have to, of course, create a Boolean. So I'm going to Control C, Control V, copy and paste, and just move that new one up just a tiny little bit, and that way we got this kind of rim in the inside. And we're going to use that as sort of the inside of our cone, and we're going to do a Boolean subtraction. So we're going to select that first object that we created first, and then hold down Shift and select our cutting cone, and go ahead and grab our Boolean difference over here. We can right mouse click and just roll over it, and it'll show which one we're looking at. But the first one is Boolean difference, which is the one we need. Once we select that, we'll see that we have the center of that cone cut out, and now we kind of have the look of what we're going for. We could even cut out the bottom if we wanted to and have our little ball fall out of that. But you can just do that with a cylinder if you want, and I'm going to kind of leave that alone for right now. And that's something you could do if you want to. Now the next thing I want to do is add our sphere. And our sphere is going to be our ball that is sort of rolling around inside of this. And now normally if you're going to animate something like this, you'd have to go in and keyframe it bit by bit, sort of getting it halfway right here, and then down over here, and then creating a keyframe, coming back around, and every 90 degrees you'd have to create a keyframe, and then slowly bring it in order to animate this ball kind of going in the center. But then I'm going to show you a neat little trick to sort of do this very quickly and easily without having to create any more than 2 keyframes, really. And the next thing I want to do is actually add another sphere. And the sphere is going to be in the center, and we're going to hide this one from the render. But the first thing I want to do is make this a little bit smaller. It doesn't have to be the same size as the other sphere, and actually technically the size on this one doesn't matter. I'm just using it as a reference for its size. And what I want to do is make it level with our other sphere on the left. So we'll go ahead and zoom in here just a little bit, and we can see that it's pretty much level with the center of the sphere on the left. And now before we do anything else, I'm going to make sure that this sphere is in the center of this cone, and it looks like it is, because this is going to be our main object for animating. And we're going to be linking the second ball to this first one. Or sorry, linking our first one to our second one. So we're going to grab sphere, just our regular sphere, the first one we created, and we're going to go up to our animation options, which is our third tab up here on the top, and we're going to stick link to sphere 2. And now these objects are linked together, and whatever motion that I do on sphere 2 is going to affect the first sphere. So all we got to do now is animate it. One thing I do want to do before I go ahead and do any major things here, I'm going to right mouse click on that sphere 2 and click hide from render. And now we no longer see that object while we're rendering, because we don't need to see it, and we're just using it as a control object for our first sphere. I'm going to go up to the animation up top and select display timeline. You can also hit F11, which will pull that up. And if your animation wizard came up, you can just close that out because we're going to be doing this manually and without the animation wizard. We're going to create a quick, probably 4-second animation. So we'll just bring our scroll our slider over here to 4. And now we can go ahead and rotate their sphere 2. We'll just start rotating this around. And if we're watching on the bottom left, you can see it says angle of rotation and it says right now around -800, and it says 2 complete revolutions. Well, the more I bring it around, it tells me how many revolutions we've actually made, which is actually great because then we don't have to pull out the calculator and divide 360 by whatever number we're coming up with. And I'm just going to pull this around for about 9 complete revolutions. It doesn't have to be perfect, just around 9. Okay, and now we have the basic animation or motion for that sphere kind of going around in a circle. And actually, now that I look at it, 9 might actually be maybe too much. So I'm going to bring it down a few more. Start maybe about 4. 4 or 5 revolutions ought to do it. And we'll bring it to the end. And now there's also one other thing we have to do, and that is make this go all the way down and sort of angle, and we have to make it come down. So first, we're going to go to the end of our animation, making sure we click this last button in our little time buttons here, and I'm going to move this down to the bottom, about right there. We take a look at the sphere and think of exactly where that's going to fit in here. So now we have our object rotating around, but it's still not following the inside of that cone like we want it to. And that's really easy, so all we have to do is grab our first sphere, and since this is the child of our parent, and our parent being the sphere 2, we can animate our child separately and not affect sphere 2. So whatever animation we do to sphere, the first sphere, it will not affect sphere 2. So what we can do now is making sure we're on that last frame again at 4 seconds. I'm just going to bring that over. And you can hold down Shift if you want to constrain it. Otherwise, you can just take a look at that line and make sure that's straight. We'll just bring it right to the center, the bottom of that cone. And now if we scrub our animation, we can see it's actually fitting along perfectly with the inside of our cone. And we have it rotating around all the way down to the bottom. And of course, the more revolutions we make, the more interesting it might be, or the more frames we have, the longer the animation, the more interesting. But this gives you an idea. And what I want to do is just render a quick little preview animation. And we're going to go up to the Animation tab, go to Render Animation Preview, and that way we can see it down at the bottom. We can watch our ball kind of going around the inside of that cone, and just kind of get an idea of how that's going to look, and just watch it. Now 5 revolutions might not be enough, depending on what you're doing, but this is kind of a neat little technique, and of course you can expand upon this and do whatever you want. Of course you don't have to bring that in either and get rid of the cone. It'll give you a nice little spiraling effect if you need to animate something spiraling. But this is just a neat little technique you can use, and it's makes it a lot easier than actually going through and creating those individual keyframes which we would have had to create at every 90 degrees of our cone. So just go ahead and play around with it, and it's kind of a fun little technique you can do, and you can of course use it with other objects for different types of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be only entirely for this, but it's just the example I wanted to show you.